Secretary of State Shannon Bellows is one of 9 secretaries of state who sent a letter to Secretary of Homeland Security nominee Markwayne Mullin seeking confirmation that ICE agents will not be deployed to polling locations during the 2026 election cycle. Last week, now former Secretary Kristi Noem told the Senate Judiciary Committee there are no plans to have ICE officers at polling locations. The letter asks for the confirmation in writing. In a statement, Bellows says, quote, that we even have to ask for written assurances that the federal government won't deploy armed agents to the polls is a sad and frightening sign of the times we're in, unquote.